This just in, Judge Eileen Cannon has set a trial date for former President Trump in the Mar-a-Lago classified documents case. The big day is May 20th, 2024.
Judge Cannon seemed to compromise between prosecutors' request for a December 2023 trial date and Trump's request to postpone the trial until after the November 2024 election. Here's Trump in a recent address.
And we have a corrupt, compromised president, crooked Joe Biden, who is dragging us into World War III. And that's what's happening on behalf of a nation that paid his family millions and millions of dollars in obvious bribes. All you have to do is take a look at how much China, how much Ukraine have paid the Biden family. It's a total disgrace and a very dangerous one. Under these circumstances, the notion that we would even consider admitting Ukraine into NATO at this time is completely unhinged. Joe Biden can't even walk up a flight of stairs on Air Force One, and he can't put two sentences together. The last thing that this incompetent administration should be doing is risking war with a nuclear-armed Russia or China or other countries. We have somebody that doesn't have a clue representing us.
So this is still a pretty rapid turnaround for a trial date as far as cases like this go, but still May 14th, when they have a pretrial hearing, is a big primary day. There are 3 states, Nebraska, Maryland, and West Virginia, holding their primaries on May 14th. Most of the states will be wrapped up by then. Now, in 2016, Trump had already clinched the nomination by mid-May, but we could see him not clinching the nomination officially until July at the GOP convention. But this could be very interesting. Trump wanting this to be held after the 2024 election, I think, is absurd. But imagine a scenario where he's the front-running GOP candidate and has enough delegates to win the nomination, and then the trial doesn't go in his favor. So the timing of this trial is a really interesting decision.
Yeah, it definitely has the potential to really upend the nomination process for the Republican Party. I think it's probably likely that the nominee will be clear by then, and it's looking like it's probably going to be Trump. And so the outcome of this trial is vastly important to his ability, obviously, to be able to win or even run in a general election. I don't know if the judge did this on purpose. That's some speculation online from conservatives. But she argued in her decision of when to set the court date that December was simply too soon because of the amount of discovery that's present in this case, and then to wait after the election would be too long. But this date is basically just bad news all around for the Republican Party. And I don't know what the outcome of the trial is going to look like. There's a couple of audio tapes of Trump that don't look too good. But I just keep going back to the fact that he was not the only individual and certainly not the only candidate in this race who had classified documents improperly. And so regardless of the timing of the trial, regardless of the outcome of the trial, even the fact that he was charged and indicted at all, to me reeks of political persecution.
I think just the sheer amount of documents he had, and that upon realizing he had documents that were not declassified, that he refused to turn them over, his inability to comply with the law, or just downright refusal to comply with the law, I think really sets him apart. Like most cases, it's not like he's receiving unique treatment. I think when you refuse to comply with a police officer, if he's asking you to do things, if you refuse to, work with prosecutors in a criminal case, they will up your charges. If you work with them and you say, yeah, I do have this thing in my possession that I shouldn't have, I'll turn it over, you do get a lesser charge. You do get treated a little bit nicer under the eyes of the law. So the fact that he had so many classified documents, denied he had them, tried to hide them, refused to turn them over, I think really sets him apart. What's interesting about this case as well is how the evidence will be treated, because you have these supposedly very sensitive classified documents that will now need to be treated as evidence. And in many cases, that makes them public record, that puts them, in front of people that probably don't have the security clearance to see them. So a lot of the pretrial hearings and motions will be about how to handle this sensitive information. So it makes sense that this has to be a timely trial. However, I'm of the thinking that holding it in mid-December, as Jack Smith wanted, makes a lot more sense considering what's going on politically. I think having this trial earlier on is something that would benefit, the Republican nomination for a candidate of president. If you have your GOP nominee convicted late in the process, that puts you in a really tough position for picking who your nominee will be. What's going to happen with those delegates that are going to the convention? That's a tough situation. I think if I was a Republican, I would be a little bit upset that the trial date was being held in mid-May. I would want a sooner trial date because of that, but I'm sure the Trump camp doesn't feel that way and would much rather have it in November. But we could see this trial drag on far beyond even the convention.
Yeah, I think that's right. It probably will be a lengthy trial because of that process, as you mentioned. And I'm just surprised that the judge didn't side with Jack Smith, the prosecutor in this case. He's a special counsel, because it's not like it's Trump's lawyers requesting December because they want to get this over with before the nomination. This is supposed to be the independent prosecutor who was investigating this. This is supposed to be the guy trying to get Trump, and he's hardly a Republican stooge. I mean, this is the guy who went after Bob McDonnell, the former Virginia governor, on corruption charges, and then that conviction ended up being vacated by the Supreme Court. He's gone after a few other Republicans in his day. He was reportedly central to the IRS targeting of conservative nonprofit groups under Lois Lerner. So this is not a guy who was trying to put it in December because he thought it would help Trump or the Republican Party. He asked for December clearly because he thought it was plausible to be able to go through discovery and get the process started by then, and the judge disagreed. And so I think that I would want a more full explanation, a clearer explanation of why exactly the judge doesn't think December is an appropriate date and why May is.
Yeah, it's really shocking, just the sheer volume of classified records in this case. Defense attorneys apparently told the court that they obtained all of the necessary security clearance to be able to start reviewing the classified materials obtained from Mar-a-Lago when they were seized by the federal investigators. And then you have the Justice Department saying that they've turned over non-classified information, including more than 428,000 records, totaling over 833,000 pages. It's 57 terabytes of surveillance footage. This is an insanely large trial. The fact that they're able to do this by May, I think, is shocking, but it makes sense that they would want to expedite this a little bit, which is something that Trump's team is really not happy about. They wanted them to take their time with this so that the trial would happen after the November 2024 election. Which makes sense for Donald Trump, makes sense that he would want that, but it also does make sense that Jack Smith's desired date of mid-December just is not possible.
Yeah, and I'm actually kind of surprised that the Trump team would not want it sooner rather than later. I mean, I understand the thinking that if Trump wins the nomination and then the general election, then he has some kind of armor on him as the incoming president. He probably is going to, if he does get convicted, have a lighter sentence, if a sentence at all, given that election. But at the same time, for Trump, these investigations and these court cases tend to actually boost him in the polls. There was a slight dip after the indictment in his poll numbers and in his favorability rating, and he quickly recovered and actually is performing even better in the past month in the polls compared to his biggest challenger, Florida Governor Ron DeSantis. Because there is this view that Trump is being politically persecuted, that this is unfair, that this is the deep state trying to get back at him for trying to pull the U.S. out of forever wars. It gives him that outsider status that he had back in 2016 and lost a bit of as being someone who served 4 years as president. And so from a strategy standpoint, political strategy standpoint, separate from the criminal issue, if I were the Trump campaign or Trump himself, I might want this to happen sooner rather than later because of the ability for him to continue to make this argument that he is being targeted because, as he said sort of famously, they're not after me, they're after you, and I'm just standing in the way.
Yeah, I think that narrative Trump has really done a good job spinning in his favor. But I do think that hopefully people who support Donald Trump will tune into court TV during these cases if they are made public. I don't think a lot of people who supported Donald Trump turned into the January 6th hearings, and I think they probably should have. But this is going to be a tricky few months for Donald Trump in this spring, because let's not forget, he's also facing 34 counts in New York on top of these 37 felony counts in Florida. So his court date for the hush money paid to the adult film star, that's March 24th. That case will probably be ongoing when the case begins, and the first pretrial hearing is May 14th and then May 20th in Florida. So he's going to have a busy few months in the spring. He's not going to be able to be on the campaign trail like he would need to be if the contest was still going. The majority of primaries will be over by mid-May. But it's going to be a tricky few months for Donald Trump in the spring to have those two cases happening at the same time. I don't know if we're going to be able to witness the demise of Donald Trump in a way that would satisfy a lot of the people who do believe he's guilty, who do believe, I think he's guilty of an insurrection, and that's a far worse crime than hush money to an adult film star or hoarding classified documents that he had access to while president. I think a lot of people have strong feelings about Donald Trump, but his base, like you mentioned, is so loyal to him and do see this as the deep state attacking him and trying to quell his campaign. But nevertheless, it's going to be a very interesting spring for the Trump camp.
Well, not to mention, he announced this week that he did receive a letter in that January 6th case, which he believes means he will be arrested, indicted for that as well, which will give him a third case to both defend himself and for members of the Democratic Party to keep their fingers crossed that he's going to go to the slammer, which to me seems pretty unlikely, but I guess we'll see. We'll be back with more Rising after this.